I will try my best to cover treaties. So treaties are a legally binding agreement that outlines the rights and duties of its signatories and is protected by international law. This is important, and this is one of the reasons why they can't just go back on treaties, even though they've tried to go back on treaties, because it's recognized internationally. But in having these conversations, it's important to understand like the legality of certain things. One being today, in this day and time, this day and age, if you were to sign a contract under duress, if you were forced to sign something, and it was under duress, that could be brought to court and be seen as not lawful. If you signed a document under the influence of substances or alcohol or anything of that sort, that contract could be considered null and void. There has been instances we know of the settlers leaning heavily into things to try and get things that favored them more during these negotiations. Okay, so there's 5 phases of this. Peace and Friendship Treaties, 1725 to 1779, Robinson Treaties, 1850, Douglas Treaties, 1850 to 1854, Numbered Treaties, 1871 to 1921, and then the modern treaties, which are considered 1922 to present. The Numbered Treaties from 1871 to 1921 is the ones that are primarily being discussed right now because those are the ones that pertain to Alberta. So 1764 to 1836, negotiation of 27 land purchases. There was a shift from cash payment and trade into favor of annuity payments. So annuity payments are basically every year the crown or the government uses the land, sells the land, you know, a portion of that money is supposed to go to bands or reserves. So for example, I'm part of a treaty that every year, this is where people are like, Indigenous people get so much money, I get $4. And they're currently in court. They've just reached a settlement over the fact that basically the way that our treaty was laid out, they went into the conversation in good faith and said, if you're not making any money, you don't owe us anything. But if you're using the land, if you're selling the land, if you're using the resources, as long as you're making money, we would like a portion of that. And we leave that up to you guys to give us a reasonable amount, a portion of the proceeds, right? That's above and beyond cost. It has not increased since 1850. So even though the government has been making money hand over fist for the resources and all of those things, they have not been paying based on the treaty that was signed. Okay, the first treaty is the one that I struggle with a little bit. Okay, so it was the maintaining peace between the East Coast and the Crown. There was something called the Truck House Clause, exclusive use of the Indigenous signatories in that land, 1749 to 1752. Indigenous people viewed treaties as meaning adding to our relations, something that was basically like, we're going to be working together, whereas the Crown viewed it more as something like, we're letting. So this one was to normalize peace and commercial relations, but the Indigenous did not see it as a surrender of their rights to the land or the resources. In 1760, there was a renewal, and it acknowledged the possibility of future non-Indigenous settlement within East Coast. France won in 1760, and there was a royal proclamation that sought to protect Indigenous sovereignty and title to traditional lands when facing what British officials knew would be increased settlement demands after the conflict ended. King George III issued a royal proclamation on October 7th, 1763, and acknowledged Indigenous land title until such a time it was ceded by treaty with the British Crown. Couldn't be settled until it was ceded to the Crown during treaty negotiation. During the American War, 30,000 refugees in 1783 of loyalists for both the Indigenous and not made their way north. In 1812, British fought Americans in conflict. Indigenous allies played a crucial role. It ended in 1814. Colonial officials went from crucial allies into barriers for colonial expansion. So basically, once there was a clash between Americans and now Canadians with the Indigenous population, basically once that war ended between the two, the British were like, we don't actually really need you anymore, and you're kind of holding up the settlement of this land. So basically they used them until they didn't need them. So the Indigenous relations transferred from the British military during that time to the civilian government in Upper and Lower Canada. And that's when they negotiated for the 27 land purchases and shifted to annuity payments. Then comes the Robinson Treaty. And in the Robinson Treaty, they maintained hunting and fishing rights. So that means if you have a status card, you don't have like a cap on how much you can fish or hunt. You don't need tags. That was for almost all of northwestern Ontario, and that laid the foundation for the numbered treaties. The reserves were to be based on the sites chosen by Indigenous leaders. Then there was the Douglas Treaty, which is Vancouver Island with Hudson's Bay. There was 14 agreements to purchase land, abolish land title in exchange to protect Indigenous fisheries and villages. Indigenous people believed that they were peace treaties, not land purchases, because again, the language. And they also believed they were representing a desire to coexist peacefully while sharing the land. If you know anything, there's a big conversation about the fact that these people really got fucked over when it came to treaties. Pardon my French, but they really got the Hudson's Bay Company. Like, when you look at the map of treaties, there's not a lot in it doesn't exist in BC. This gap you see here in BC, all here, no treaties. Yeah, that's Hudson's Bay Company. They played a really big role in what happened to Indigenous people in Canada. Then we get into the numbered treaties. There's a Selkirk in 1817. Again, Hudson's Bay argued that the agreement constituted a land surrender. Canada negotiated with Hudson's Bay to purchase the land without consulting the Indigenous or Métis. William McDougall traveled to reserving the settlement River Lot Farms, led to the Red River Resistance in 1869-1870. In 1869, Louis Riel, who is Métis, organized and stopped the government reps from entering. The community proclaimed a provisional government under Riel. They ended up negotiating, and it resulted in the Manitoba Act, 1870. 1.4 million acres of land to be reserved for children of Métis heads of household. It was to be distributed and given individually and on a certificate, and each certificate was worth 160 or 240 acres or dollars dependent on their age and status. That was agreed in 1870, and it didn't commence distribution until 1876, causing many of the people who lived in that area to disperse while waiting for all of this to play out. So this was never realized. So even though they signed the papers, it was never realized. Manitoba Métis Federation filed lawsuit in 1981. Courts ruled they never got the land. Then we're getting into the numbered treaties. They were promised reserve lands, annuities, and right to hunt fish on Crown land. There was clauses for schools and teachers to be provided, provision for agricultural implements to ensure transition from mobile to settlement life. For the Indigenous, the agreements had a strong emphasis on shared usage, rights, and responsibility for the lands rather than surrendering the land, but the state viewed it as a land surrender. So Treaties 1 through 7 is how the Department of Indian Affairs adopted assimilation policies in the northwest part of Canada. And also opened it up to the north to development. The first two treaties did not outline right to fish and hunt. There was the fewest provisions, reserve lands fixed at 160 acres per family of 6, and annuities at $3. Treaty 3, which is in the Lake of the Woods, the land was increased to 640 acres per family of 5 and guaranteed hunting and fishing on unoccupied lands. $5 annuity, one-time $12 gratuity, as well as $1,500 annually for ammunition and wine. Treaty 4 in 1874, they were trapping, fishing, and hunting. Treaty 5 is similar to Treaty 3, reduction of land, 260 acres, and one-time $5,500 payment for ammo, twine, agriculture, and tools. There was a huge issue with all these things because, again, it was viewed by the Indigenous people as a nation-to-nation agreement, not a we're giving up our land to you and these are the rules we're going to follow on your land. Do you see what I'm saying? There was a shift with Treaty 6. They refused to sign despite being threatened with starvation. And that's the thing to remember here is all of these treaties were made under duress. They were putting pressure on Indigenous people to sign these things. Eventually, there was the end of the bison. There was a reduction in rations, and they had to sign and settled on reserve in 1882. 3 other chiefs had signed in 1876. There was a chief, Sweetgrass, who apparently died at the hands of his people due to their dissatisfaction with several leadership decisions. Many prior of 1 to 5, like Treaty 1 to 5, had a medicine chest to be maintained by the Indian agents for use of the band, ensuring assistance during famine and disease. $1,000 per year for 3 years, $5 annuities, as well as $25 for headmen and chiefs each year. One-time $12 per person school and a school for each reserve. 87 requested ranching help instead of agricultural help. They requested more cattle. Treaties 8 to 11, 160 acres for those who chose to live off reserve. That's what I've gotten through so far. But if we look, treaty land takes up a large portion of Canada. This is also why separatists in Alberta, believing that they can take Alberta land, also ignores the fact that Indigenous people themselves do not believe that they gave up their land. Because when they signed those treaties, they were under the impression they did not.